Welcome back. In 2003, Andrew Meldrum was the Southern Africa correspondent for The Guardian newspaper when this happened.
I've been declared, what is it? A prohibited immigrant. I'm being deported now. I'm going directly to the airport. This is not the action of a government that is confident in its own legitimacy, and it is afraid of a free press, and it is afraid of the independent and critical reporting.
Illegally kicked out of Zimbabwe by the Robert Mugabe regime, Meldrum continued to report throughout Southern Africa for The Guardian. Now the senior editor of Global Post, an online news service focusing on international news, Andrew Meldrum joins us from Boston. Welcome.
Thank you.
Andrew, let's first start with this clip we just showed about you being kicked out of Zimbabwe a couple years ago. What exactly happened there? What led to that?
The government had, well, there's a long story for that. I was arrested. I was put on trial for publishing falsehoods in the government's very kind of draconian anti-press law. I was on trial for 2 months. I was acquitted. And then the government came after me and said, well, we don't care if you're acquitted or not. We're going to get rid of you. And so then I was abducted by government agents. As you saw, I was held captive with a hood over my head for 12 hours, and then I was forcibly put onto an airplane out of the country, even though the courts in Zimbabwe had ruled that that was an illegal action.
I imagine this was a pretty frightening experience.
It was a frightening experience, especially because I knew people who had been taken, who had been abducted by those very same agents, and put with a hood put over their head, and they were very severely beaten and tortured to the point of unconsciousness. And I'm not talking about ordinary people. This was a member of parliament and a very prominent lawyer in Zimbabwe, so I wasn't sure what was going to happen to me at that point, and I was worried.
Now, this was a pretty harrowing experience, and we all watched it here in North America. But I suspect it wasn't a terrible surprise to you, considering you had been in the region since the 80s, right?
That's right. I was in Zimbabwe from 1980 until when I was thrown out of the country, as you saw, in 2003. So that was 23 years. And then I spent another further 4 years reporting across Southern Africa.
How did you end up in Zimbabwe?
Well, I had always wanted to be a foreign correspondent. That was my ambition. And I worked as a journalist in the United States for several years. And then when I saw Zimbabwe become independent, I thought that is a positive development. That is something that I want to write about the movement of a country from white minority Rhodesia to majority rule Zimbabwe, from a bloody race war to a racial reconciliation and peace. And I thought that was a great opportunity for me. And so I left my work in the United States. I sold my car and I bought a ticket over to Zimbabwe and started working there, reporting on the positive developments in the country.
At first, there was real hope about Mugabe, but it hasn't quite worked out that way. Do you think there is hope for Zimbabwe? I mean, can the opposition rule there?
Well, I do think there's hope for Zimbabwe. In the long run, I think there's lots of hope. In the short term, I think there's a lot of hurdles that have to be jumped. One is for the opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change, yes. But I think with the even greater hope is the overall population of Zimbabwe. They have the highest literacy rate in all of Africa. And they have a very good infrastructure. Even now, after 10 years of complete collapse, I think it would be easier to get things to work properly in Zimbabwe than in many other countries. Also, in addition, there is a lot of natural resources, mineral resources like platinum and gold and chrome. And also there is a good base for agriculture in the country. So when you add that all up together, it would still take a lot of work, but I do believe that Zimbabwe could be put on the road back to democracy and back to prosperity very quickly.
Well, as you say, there's a lot of resources in Zimbabwe and throughout Africa. It's one of the reasons China has gotten so interested in Zimbabwe and throughout the continent. What is China's interest? What's its role and what's its influence on that in Africa?
China's interest in Africa is in natural resources, is in mineral resources, is in resources that it doesn't have and that it needs for its industry. So it's everything from, as I mentioned, platinum, chrome, coal. There are many other gemstones. There is coltan, which is used as a key ingredient in all cell phones. So there are lots of those. And also it wants to spread its industrial base. So it often China takes on big infrastructural projects such as railroads, building railroads in Africa and building stadiums and office buildings in Africa. China sells its airplanes to Zimbabwe and many others, its jet fighters. So, it's business really that it's looking for in Africa.
Now, I mean, Africa has suffered through colonization for centuries now. Is this a new wave of colonization by China in Africa?
Well, it's not colonization as such, but it is a business relationship where it is looking for the raw materials and it is looking for contracts that it will have at a profit.
But is it beneficial to Africa, or is there, I memean, China blocked negotiations in Darfur. It seems like they're really exerting a lot of power far away from their home base.
Well, absolutely. But what I'm saying is they're looking for profitable relationships. They're not making any statements about, there's mutual beneficial growth from both things. They're in it for a profit. And what they say to African leaders is, look, we're not asking you any questions about human rights, about good governance, about rational economic policies, about corruption. We are just saying make a deal. And so, many African leaders, such as Robert Mugabe, find this very attractive. And as you say, in Darfur, the Chinese are saying, yeah, we want your oil, and we're not going to ask you any questions about what you're doing in Darfur, or if there's genocide or not. We don't care. We just want your oil, and here's what we'll pay.
All right, well, there's a lot more to talk about regarding Africa and about your work. More with Andrew Meldrum after this break.